us today for our 12th Geothink and Learn. Also kicking off our series of webinars in the new year before the conclusion of the grant that will occur at the end of February. So welcome everybody. My name is Drew Bush. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Geography at McGill University with the Geothink grant. And before I introduce each of the members of our panels, I just wanted to go over a few notes for you as attendees on how you can interact with our panelists. So first of all, you might notice that depending on what kind of device you're on, at the bottom of your screen or at the top, if you scroll your mouse, you'll see that there are 3 buttons. The first button you're going to see is a chat button, and you'll see that there are already some chats in there. You can chat with our panelists directly right there, and you can also manipulate who you're chatting with specifically if you have a comment for somebody that you might want to talk to about their topics in particular. You can also ask questions of the whole panel. So there is a Q&A button down there as well. And what you'll see is your question will pop up in our Q&A, and the panelists will have an opportunity to respond to it in writing. After all of our initial talks are done, we'll also have a Q&A session, so they'll be choosing some of these questions as well to respond to verbally. And then finally, the third option you have for interacting with our panel is that you can also ask to raise your hand, and that will actually ping me as your host, and I will see that you're raising your hand, and then I'll be able to promote you to actually share your video and your audio, and you can, in a town hall style format, talk with our panelists directly as well. Just a few other quick notes for you. If you are dialing in from the telephone, of course, you'll know that these couple options are not available to you. But if you're on a tablet device, you should have each of these options. And if for any reason they're not working for you, you can feel free to message me in the chat, and I can try to help you figure out why that might be. The final note is that this entire session is being recorded for video purposes because we will be posting it on our website and our YouTube channel for folks who come along to look at this session later. So be aware that, if you do want to be promoted to ask a question and share your own video, that it would be a part of our video record as well. So without further ado, before I turn it over to our convener, Project Director Renee Sieber, I just want to introduce everybody. Renee Sieber, as I just mentioned, is the Project Director for Geothink. She's also an Associate Professor in McGill University's Department of Geography and its School of Environment. She's recognized worldwide for her research in public participation geographic information systems, the geospatial web, and community participation and use of new information and communications technologies. Our next panelist is Alex Tasiuk. He leads active transportation projects and coordinates a dockless bike share system for the University of British Columbia's campus and community planning team. He's also a graduate of UBC's Masters of Community and Regional Planning program. So he's led projects in bicycle sharing, vehicle sharing, active transportation data analysis, and walkability for seniors, among a few. He also is a past project manager for Geothink before he started his graduate work. Sonia Solomon, another of our past project managers for Geothink, is joined the grant in its midterm and led the grant through to its final year. She's completing her PhD in communication studies at McGill University, and you can all join me in wishing her well, because I know she's submitting very soon in a couple weeks, so we're really lucky to have her here with us today. And she's currently also a research fellow at the Media History Research Center at Concordia University here in Montreal as well. And our final, but not our least panelist, is Suchi Sanjabat. He's graduated from his master's in geography at McGill University under Geothink as well. We all know him more affectionately as Peck. And as a Geothink student, he was actually the coordinator for all of our student activities. So he led interfaces between students and the rest of the grant. He provided support to our grant activities, such as communications and event planning. He also ran our newsletter. And he continues to build upon all of this academic training and all of his work as the applied research lead at one of Geothink's partners, Open North, a nonprofit here in Montreal that is leading internationally in Canada on smart cities. So that's our panel for today. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our convener, Renee Sieber.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this, not the last Geothink and Learn. So I just want to begin by saying thank you all to the panelists for joining us. It's a pleasure to see you all again, digitally, if not in the flesh. And it's also, I hope, some credit to Geothink that you're doing well now. So let me begin by saying, what is Geothink? Geothink is a Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada funded, SSHRC funded, partnership grant that looked at the impact of open data, crowdsourcing, the geospatial web, and citizen science on conversations between cities and citizens and citizens and cities. So we know that there is a lot of hyperbole about the impact of these technologies, for better or for worse, and we wanted to get a handle both on how these technologies currently affect this conversation, transform this conversation possibly, and what these technologies and conversations lead to. So that's Geothink. It's a pan-Canadian grant that will end at the end of February, but we'll talk a little bit more about the future of Geothink as part of this conversation. That involved 27 researchers. I cannot remember how many partners because that's fluctuated over time, and indeed that is one of the challenges and opportunities of working on a SSHRC partnership grant or on a grant like this, that there is that kind of fluctuation. The partners have been primarily cities across Canada, so we have involved the major cities across Canada, in which has been incredibly important to us because it grounds our research. So we're not asking questions that are purely theoretical, although we did ask theoretical questions. We expanded, we poked at theory, we tested our theory in real time. So that's all of what Geothink is and hope to be. And lastly, Geothink hoped to set up a situation in which cities could plan for the next technology, like dockless bicycles or dockless scooters, that would impact them and how they could respond to those new technologies. So what is it about doing this kind of grant that was challenging and exciting at the same time? Well, Pamela Robinson, who's a co-applicant on the grant and is at Ryerson, said that what made this grant unique and challenging at the same time was that we were doing research in real time. And what did that mean? That we were researching technologies that were changing as we were researching them, which it's an interesting challenge to try to do that. It's not just the technologies changed, but the pertinent research questions changed as we were attempting to conduct the research. One clear example of that was that when we submitted our letter of intent to SSHRC, it predominantly focused on the geospatial web. So that's computerized mapping on the web, digital earths like Google Maps, Mapbox, all of this cloud-based spatial data handling and visualization. It quickly shifted to open data. Now, that's not inconsistent with a geospatial web because about 80% of open data has a locational component to it, but we were really surprised at how much the cities wanted to talk about open data handling. Another thing that was an interesting shift was, and this impacted our ability to have certain kinds of partners, was as the cities were saying, we want you to talk about open data, they said, but we're very wary of any of the private sector partners you have on the grant because we're going to do everything in-house and we're going to build everything from scratch. And we're afraid that if we get involved in a partnership grant that has IBM on it, we did have IBM on our grant, that they would be pushing their technology on us. Lo and behold, about a year and a half into the grant, all of these cities had switched to Socrata, which was an open data portal company. So they completely shifted from this notion that they could do the open data in-house, the delivery of the open data, to outsourcing it to a private sector company, which it makes it very interesting to, you know, what's the research question then that you're asking? Also, our technologies, the methods changed over time. We had sub-projects within our grant looking at, for example, the impact of the sharing economy on cities. So the impact of, say, TaskRabbit, the impact of Uber on cities. Towards the end, we saw people increasingly talk about smart cities. And I think that's one of the successes of the Geothink Partnership Grant, was that it set us up to go from open data and a geospatial web and crowdsourcing of citizen science in the beginning to be able to address the implications of smart cities, for example, on ensuring that data remains open. And that's an interesting question. I also want to conclude by talking a little bit about the challenges of working nitty-gritty with partners. We originally were very optimistic about kind of the organic nature of our grant, and we found, and maybe Alex can talk a little bit about this later, about how non-organic working with partners was, and how you constantly had to go back to them and saying, you know, what do you want? What do you think of what we're doing? So lots of conference calls. And that's partly a way that we conceived of partners, that they really are much more like collaborators, and we wanted the ideas to be generated from the partners. And that led to a fabulous project with Linda Lowe at the City of Vancouver on open data standards that has since been taken up by GovX at Johns Hopkins, and is now our inventory of open data standards is being used throughout North America and Europe. So I think I'll end it there, and looking forward to hearing what other people say about their experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. Alex here, I'll go next. That led perfectly into the things that I wanted to talk about today. As Drew mentioned, I was the first project manager from 2014 to 2016. And before that, I was actually a summer student at Geothink in 2013. So was familiar with the grants and kind of the early stages of it up to the midpoint. And as Renee mentioned, you know the numbers, 30-ish different partners, over 100 students, and over 8 time zones. So we had researchers from LA to London, and that's a big spread, and that's a lot of people. And that meant that there was a fantastic wealth of knowledge and enthusiasm and perspectives that got brought to Geothink and allowed it to accomplish what it accomplished. But it also meant that Geothink had a really core challenge, which was actually connecting people, ideas, and needs. So I just want to touch on kind of some of the habits that we cultivated in Geothink and how it wasn't necessarily organic, but we had to create a structure to turn that challenge into a strength. So those 3 things were events, the Rapid Response Think Tank, or R2T2 for short, which is a fantastic acronym, and regular storytelling. So in terms of events, I think one thing that Geothink did right is they paid to bring people together. So we hosted 2 major events a year, rotating around partner cities, the Summer Institutes and the AGM. both spawned countless projects. My favorite from this, well, not favorite, but the one that stands out to me is a collaboration in between April Lindgren, who is a professor of journalism in Ryerson, and John Corbett, who is a professor of geography at UBC Okanagan, to create a map of all the changes in news across Canada. So news closures, local news closures, openings, expanded hours, shortened hours, that actually used crowdsourcing to accomplish this, this resource. And it's available online for anyone to see now and to anyone to add to. The summer institutes, those were a lot of fun. The crowdsourcing one that we did in New Waterloo, which was the first one, was great because we thought a little bit outside the box. We actually turned to a case study modeled from business schools. The goal was to bring students together and have them learn some sort of central competencies of Geothink, so that there was a bit of a shared knowledge, shared experience, and shared skills, as well as to spawn any type of research that would come out of it. And we thought, well, maybe we can engage a partner in this too. So what we ended up doing is having this summer institute on crowdsourcing, where we brought in Darren Brabham, one of the researchers core to the grant from the States. He was a crowdsourcing expert to teach a bit of critical theory, and then we solicited other profs to teach some how to do wireframes of applications, or how to use crowdsourcing as opposed to just how to critique it. And over 3 days, those students created wireframed apps and app ideas for the city of Ottawa to solve a crowdsourcing problem of how to engage people with their regional parks. And so we actually created real value for our partner while bringing in students into a fun environment where they learned a lot about crowdsourcing. I learned a ton about crowdsourcing through this, as well as we're able to meet each other and see the different breadth of ideas within Geothink. So the Rapid Response Think Tank, by the midway point, we had about 12 projects done. And so the idea here was that not every single question required the rigors of an academic publication to get an answer. Sometimes you just needed an answer quickly. And we needed a way to fund students to work on those answers. And so this was kind of an internal internship program within Geothink that was written into the original grant application. And it had budget behind it, which again is crucial. That's your budget determines where your values are in a grant like this. And like Renee said, the project that started with Rachel Bloom's work really happened out of a conversation with one of our partners who said, I know there are open data standards out there, but I'm a one-person shop. I don't have the time to look them up when we publish data. And we said, we could look up the standards. And Rachel was hired, and like Renee said, eventually went on to finish this project and work at Open North, which was another Geothink partner in Montreal. Those kind of side conversations are something that we jokingly referred to as doing the rounds, but really about once every month or once every 2 months, we would be reaching out to partners to say, hey, what questions are you having lately? Here's some research that came out in Geothink that you might be interested in. Let us know what you're interested in. And hey, this person said that they might be interested in working in something in your city. Let's set up a conversation. And so it's not just what can those partners give to you financially or in kind, but what problems are they seeing? What issues are they seeing? How do they react to the research that's coming out of Geothink and the ideas that are coming out of Geothink? And that, I think that process helped hone the end products that were created in the grant. And lastly, I want to chat a little bit about regular storytelling. I think this was a crucial aspect to figuring out, or to really creating a bit of a base of knowledge about what's happening in Geothink. Like I said, 8 time zones is a lot of area to try to connect people. So fairly early into 2014, we decided let's hire a digital journalist. Drew Bush has been our mostly on again, slightly off again digital journalist for the grant. And him and others have created media, including videos, podcasts, blog posts, webinars, just to cover new publications, new ideas, what's happening in Geothink, different events, and really have and both external to the world, but also internal communication on the different things that are happening in Geothink. And it's really fantastic when you're talking to a partner and said, hey, we just had a researcher that's done this great project on civic infomediaries. And they say, great, what's a civic infomediary? And then you can point them, well, our digital journalist just synthesized that piece and wrote a fantastic little excerpt on it. How about I send that your way? So, and other things like the newsletter really helps create some sort of information that went out to partners. So those are the three things, events, the R2T2, and regular storytelling, that I think were crucial in trying to overcome that challenge of this being a very broad group with a variety of interests and needs, and happy that I was able to be a part of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. And now we hear from Sonia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So I think I'll just begin by briefly going over what my role was at Geothink, and then just open it up to what I think some of the more successful strategies that we employed, and the tools and resources that we used, and then maybe just close out with some of the key outcomes and research legacies that have certainly survived the completion of the research grant, or the near completion of our research grant, I should say. So like Alex, the main role I had was, of course, managing and overseeing the research activities of the grant. And I think foremost to that role was to connect, which is a great word that Alex used, to connect or make relevant the partner portion of our grant. And I'd say that the challenges were often some of the most rewarding parts of my experience, getting to wear multiple hats in any one given day to engage with this very multi-stakeholder and multi-partner grant, and collaborate with the researchers that we had, not only in academia, as well as nonprofit partners and municipal staff, and really be involved with the kind of hands-on research that goes on in real time between them. So I actually wanted to open up and share an anecdote. I had a colleague recently ask me, what is the secret sauce that makes a partnership grant successful? By which they meant sort of the single defining or winning marker of success. And I think, not unlike with technologies or their algorithms, there is no one single secret sauce. Certainly when it comes to Geothink, I think a more apt characterization is sort of an open blend. So where secret refers to these kind of closed and often proprietary industry secrets, we were really committed to open, both when it comes to data, as well as conceptualizing our commitment to sharing our frameworks and advanced research with the periphery of our networks as well. So I think the open blend really involves many things, some of which my colleagues have already mentioned. So especially building a collaborative approach to engaging our partnerships. So not only does this involve finding synergies between partner organization goals and some of our existing research capacities, but more importantly, as Renee also mentioned, with the challenge of real-time technological research and change, it also involved being able to anticipate the future needs of our partners as well. And I think this was really especially evident with almost all of our municipal partners, whose needs certainly evolved throughout the 5-year life cycle of the grant. And this is where I really see the value added of Geothink to our partners, is being able to synthesize and translate some of that some of those real-time changes in order to anticipate and sort of grow in unison with our partner needs. And I think one of the strongest components of Geothink was really our ability to identify these cross themes between the existing strands of research that we initially conceptualized in our grant proposal, and really pick up on some of the emerging themes and then see them as tools that would drive our research forward rather than determinants in order to keep up with these changes. So as mentioned, a grant that studies technologies, data, and government-citizen interactions, you can imagine how many changes in any combination of these fields would occur within 5 years. So really just growing in unison with the changing partner needs, I think was a really tremendous value of Geothink. And I think one of the key things needed to accomplish that, of course, is this ability to identify what some of the more enduring social problems that are being faced with new technologies and that are often obfuscated by the sort of hype of new technologies. So I think what Geothink did, and I think did really well, was to make sure that technology actually enhances that relationship between citizens and governments and provides pathways to do that, whether they be new frameworks, as mentioned, whether they be connecting students to municipal staff, new applications being built, etc. So I think also beyond just identifying these issues, identifying them means very little if we're not able to translate them in, I think, meaningful and legible ways for not only our municipal partners, but also for the public at large. And I think a great clear example of this was the work that Geothink did regarding Sidewalk Toronto and making sure that citizen concerns around things like privacy, data governance, data literacy, etc., had a voice. And of course, this research has taken on into new avenues that we can discuss a little more later. But I think this is where knowledge mobilization really comes in to strengthen the value of the research insights and outputs for the grant. So our commitment to knowledge mobilization and disseminating our research outputs in creative ways, one of which is this very webinar series that we've come up with, was beyond just disseminating our outputs, was really about making relevant the partner contributions as well as the public needs that are addressed by our research. And I think I'll just close off with some of the more mundane aspects of managing the grant. I think for anyone who's currently involved in a partnership grant or is applying for one, I would definitely suggest leveraging all of the really great tools and resources that SSHRC provides. SSHRC was incredibly supportive during our grant, and not only with simply providing us with the actual means to conduct our research, but providing some of these tools to help manage and grow it. So this included anything from supporting knowledge mobilization on Twitter to guides that I would download from the SSHRC website to tabulate or what we would call bean counting some of our various deliverables and research outputs. And lastly, I think the institutional support too from McGill goes into this blend. So the Office of Sponsored Research and the Department of Geography, the HR team, who is absolutely crucial in ensuring our daily functioning, so staying on top of things like expense reports, making sure that they comply with university regulations on time, which is slightly challenging when you have over 100 students who, through the nature of their work, are sometimes unreachable and are taking, doing field work or taking fellowships. And so there's sort of this more mundane administrative capacity too that takes up a lot of this blend. So I think I'll leave it at that, and hopefully we can get to some other things in the Q&A. Actually, I lied. I think the last thing I'll say is maybe there's not a secret sauce, but I think there's a kind of secret glue, if you will, that does hold these things together, which is really great leadership. And I think the success of Geothink is really indicative of the committed and dedicated leadership of our PI, Renee. So I'd like to thank her and everyone else that went into that success.
Thank you, Sonia. And now we'll hear from Peck.
Hi, everybody. So I've been away from Geothink for a while as well. And I am going to put on my Geothink hat back on and just take off my Open North hat for now. I had the pleasure of actually being there prior to the grant itself. There was I was one of the first summer students and got to meet initial representatives, potential partners from the likes of Medicine Hat, for example, Regina. And what struck me as we progressed throughout the years was that we actually lost some people along the way. And that's a bit of a reflection on the previous comments on the need for malleability and flexibility. The landscape changes. And now as part of Open North, that is really something that strikes home. So part of what I'm going to be talking about here is sage advice, let's say, for those students out there who are currently in interdisciplinary grants or multi-partnership grants. One of them is that really the industry or the sectors involved really do move much faster than academia. The research subjects change, and it is not just about the research subjects changing, but the political priorities, the policies, and the funding as well. That shifts, and that requires shifts in both from the point of view of applicants, co-applicants, in how they shape their research agendas, but also very much for students doing their theses. There are actually time limits when it comes to researching smart cities, for example, time limits on your thesis. You need to be quick and thorough in order to make sure you don't miss the boat. That's one of those observations I've only been able to make after leaving Geothink. But really, the legacy of Geothink, part of it will be represented in Open North, very much. Open North has benefited quite a bit from the labor and research outputs that it has been able to leverage from its partnerships with specific Geothink co-applicants. And it has resulted in my current position here. Alex mentioned the rapid response think tank. So there are a lot of nonprofits out there in the open data and open government sector that simply do not have the time nor the capacity to be able to engage with academic research, academic outputs, particularly peer-reviewed academic outputs. And that was really identified as one of the needs for the rapid response think tank, knowledge mobilization. However, being able to move from a position within Geothink to Open North, and now being in a position where Open North is building its own applied research lab, and it has a growing team of researchers in the social sciences. Open North is now becoming empowered to do its own research. So we actually do not need somebody else to do research on our behalf. Instead, we now are looking for partners for collaboration. That is really a testament to the ability for the academic community to empower another sector. But it takes time and it takes good students. The other thing I'd like to talk a bit about is interdisciplinarity and the role of the student in a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary grant. Alex and I had the opportunity to, the responsibility, but also the opportunity to have a very broad overview of what is happening in the grant. And part of that involves, taking stock of who's outputting what. That lets students really have a real understanding of what are those research questions that align with each other. How do these different research interests fit within the same framework or lead to the same outcomes, or how are different academics trying to triangulate using different methods or different research questions. And bringing that approach outside of the academic sphere is something that I would highly recommend trying in the real world, because in the nonprofit sector, in the area of smart cities or urban development, urban planning, the problems that we deal with in academia are all the same. They just are being treated with a slightly different lens. So synthesizing different sources of knowledge and across different disciplines is really a benefit. Being involved as a student, being involved in the program of grant administration as well was highly beneficial. So I would actually encourage any student who is funded under a grant to try to get a feel for who's funding this. What is the larger framework within which I'm working? Who are my supervisors, collaborators? Because really appreciating the grant structure allows you to appreciate the need for proper program management, the work that goes in, that is put in by everybody who handles logistics or finance, program planning, and your own supervisors' inputs into the grant, and allows you to understand where the money comes from, what is my role, and what is the broader goal within which my own research is contributing to. Those are the main recommendations I like to make. Interdisciplinary grants are always great, especially those that let you really connect with a whole variety of students. And I have certainly been able to take away from the very first meeting in the Spatial Knowledge and Information Canada conference with all the students. I've been able to take away professional collaborations, research collaborations, and friendships. So I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you, Peck, for those insights. And just as a reminder, before I open up our session for Q&A from our attendees, there are 3 ways that you can participate. So again, those buttons that I directed to you to at the beginning are either at the bottom or the top of your screen. You'll see a chat button where there's already a chat taking place. There's a Q&A button where there's already a number of questions coming in. As well, if you'd like to raise your hand, I'll get pinged over here at Geothink headquarters, and I can promote you to share your video and your audio as well. And Renee has something I think she wants to add.
Drew, could you take a couple of minutes and reflect on your experience as project manager towards the end of Geothink?
Sure. Actually, that was going to be the first question I wanted to ask as well. So I've only recently, as of July, stepped up to sort of take on a project management role. And I think, I mostly would echo a lot of what other panelists have already said. I think the hallmarks of Geothink really has been this sustained engagement with partners. So as Peck mentioned, this idea that the research, landscape changes, and that, a partnership grant like this, it really should be at its best driven by the needs, the practical applications of the research that the partners, both in the cities and in the nonprofit world and in the industry world, are really, facing the problems that they face, the types of issues that they're dealing with. I think, the the point of a grant like this is to really bring to bear all of the resources that are available in the academic world and to really help to move those issues forward, to improve quality of life for citizens in cities, to improve the way that municipal officials are able to do their work, and to bring insight. And I think, that's one thing that's unique to the academic world is that, we certainly have the time to be able to step back and do many of these things for our partners and with our partners, and to really add value to the work that they, have to do. And I would say, the other hallmark I would really point out, and maybe this will get me to one of the questions I wanted to ask, is the mentorship of students. So I think just in this panel, you see people who have gone from being Geothink students to being project managers, to running student activities, to one of our attendees had to leave, but she went from being a Geothink student to being a Geothink collaborator when she took on her assistant professor position at University of Calgary. So I think, that mentorship and the summer institutes that Alex mentioned are also another hallmark. In my experience, in terms of managing the grant, I think the challenge really is how do you marry all of these disparate needs, right? We have students, we have co-applicant researchers, we have partners that are a variety of different types. And as Peck alluded to, they all have different needs that are on different time frames. And that's actually the first question I wanted to ask all of you, because I think I wanted to push a little deeper on this idea that several of our panelists mentioned, this idea that the grant is malleable, we can respond to needs. We had this neat rapid response think tank, but what do you do when those needs are in conflict? How do we, meet the need of a master's student who has to write a thesis while also delivering for a partner who has something that needs to be done in the next month? So that's my first question for our panel.
So there's no easy answer to that. Alex, before he joined the grant, actually did. So one of the things we decided early on before we got the money was to look at ways to strengthen these collaborations. And these kinds of time lags, I think, sort of were the number one or the number two challenge for university partner relationships. So there is no easy way to carve off bite-sized pieces to do this kind of research. And I found it additionally challenging because university structures were so different from each other. So certain universities had greater flexibility to momentarily engage their students in something that was not a part of their core mission in completing their work. Other universities simply could not do that. The students were hired under union contracts and had relatively rigid requirements. Some universities had very shortened graduate degrees, so there literally was no time to do this. So I think the solutions are emergent, and they're not readily apparent. One of the things that we strive for in our grant, because it was a technology grant, was to plan for the unpredictable, to try to predict the unpredictable. And that's equally true for trying to predict how much of a student's time you can get. So creatively, how you engage the students in these very short bursts.
Yeah, and I think I'll follow up on that as well. I think it's a very difficult thing to accomplish. And I think we try to do it in two spheres, one of which was, I mean, through management of the grant as well as through the research content of the grant. So on the management side, I think we tried to do this with a governance structure that evolved every year. So at every AGM, we would appoint and agree upon collectively, not just appoint, different theme leaders, different committees, different committee leaders for things like student engagement, and those would be rotating positions. And this would also ensure that the highest possible synergies were available, for instance, for a master's student to connect with an early career researcher, etc. So I think the governance structure does aid in that a little bit as well. And I think in terms of research, it was really about creating that malleability and predicting the unpredictable, as Renee just said, in terms of opening up the interdisciplinary perspective. So making sure that each theme cluster, as we called it, had different voices, you know, scholars from law, scholars from geography, urban planning, etc., and that the project lead or theme lead of those would rotate as well, so that we ensured different disciplinary voices would be heard. So I think, yeah, there were a lot of ways in which we try to account for that, but a lot of it happens on the fly and is sort of emergent, as Renee mentioned.
I want to riff off that a little bit. I'm not going to really answer your question here, Drew, but I think something what Sonia and Renee was said there was interesting. And I want to preface this with a kudos to SSHRC for allowing us to build flexibility in as a core value of this grant. When we got to the midterm point about 2 years in, and we're going through what rereading everything that we said we were going to set out and accomplish, we had these 6 themes and we had distinct areas within these 6 themes that we were going to research. And we got to the midway point and we said, ooh, we've shifted. We're still doing some of those things, but a lot of those questions aren't really as relevant as we thought we're doing. And wow, we're doing a whole bunch of stuff on open data that doesn't really fit into any one of these. And so we changed a lot of the content of those themes midway through the grant. And then we also circled back and said, yeah, no, that was still a core question, that was something that we should have been answering, and we'll continue that as we move forward. But building flexibility in allowed us to be able to go back to SSHRC and said, hey, as our promise to be flexible, we're going to be flexible.
Sometimes it's not that difficult to engage with a municipal partner or a nonprofit sector partner. They may have different requirements, but they still will respect the grant co-applicants as the academic experts. So some of this also involves presenting to partners exactly what kind of options that you have for them. And communicating that clearly allows you to set expectations.
So I wanted to ask a follow-up question, and I know Mookie has a really excellent question too that I'd like to get to in a moment, but just to follow up on what we're already discussing, you know, one aspect is how do you meet the different needs of the folks in a partnership grant, all of the different types of people that are involved and organizations that are involved. The other question is, you know, looking back now, we're at the end of this grant, and it's a pretty long grant. You know, we're over 5 years now, and I wonder about how do we sustain engagement? So, are there specific strategies or ways that, you know, we keep making sure that our partners, that our other co-applicants, that you know, our students remain involved throughout the lifetime of the grant, so that we can keep them involved as we move on to new topic areas?
Well, one easy way is to seed our partners with our former students, PEC being one example. Another, a lot of the collaborations that we created during the grant, they create a momentum and they keep going regardless. So I will continue to do open data standards, and not only will I occasionally talk to the city of Vancouver, but that's opened up potential collaborations or conversations with other cities across North America. So it's about building durable partnerships. It's relatively easy, I think, to build relationships amongst researchers because we're all kind of cut from the same cloth. It's much more challenging, but subsequently more rewarding to build relationships with partners and to have those survive over time. And besides, you know, they're great friends now. And they don't stay in their organizations either. So they move as well, and the connections move with them. So it's really creating and sustaining those relationships within the partner organizations.
Do you have an example of that, Renee, that you could talk about?
Well, Open North is the single best example of the durability of a relationship that we have. The fact that not only do we have permanent employees now at Open North, and we've had a lot of R2T2 people go through Open North, but also I think that we've opened up opportunities for them to get additional grants, and we've hopefully allowed them to leverage us. So often in a shared partnership grant, we talk about leveraging the resources of the partners. It's useful to think about this as partners being able to leverage their relationship with us so they can grow as well.
Absolutely. Putting my Open North hat back on. Open North recently applied for and won a grant from Infrastructure Canada in partnership with Evergreen, a nonprofit based in Toronto, to provide support under the Community Support Program to all Canadian communities, which will be rolling out in January 2019. And the success of this does stem from our partnership with Geothink co-applicants and the variety of expertise that is available in Geothink. We were definitely able to get the urban planning expertise, the geography, the GIS expertise, the communication studies expertise, for example. And that is being able to sustain those relationships then allows us to bring them with us in our own applications as well. The second thing is that now that I'm on the other side, so to speak, yes, the priorities do change, and the priority of a partner, of an academic partner to a grant, is really about, okay, is this going to be a useful way to spend my time engaging with an academic group? Am I going to benefit from the academic outputs from this grant? And receiving assurances that they will. That can be through continual outreach, communications, continual updates, demonstration of progress. That assures partners that there's going to be some benefit, even if it's a bit further down the line than they would normally operate on.
Yeah, one of the early findings that we had in thinking about partnerships and how to create successful partnerships in between industry or public partners and academics was continual outputs that were useful to industry. So I think that's even having a digital journalist who will interview a researcher as the research is ongoing and not just when it's finished, to create a little bit of an output and something useful for a partner. Sonia, you are a communications PhD. How much of this is just a big communications problem?
That's a good question. A lot in terms of both management of course, and in terms of the changes that I think we've seen happen in this kind of ecosystem between government, citizens, and technologies as Geothink has ended. In terms of the management, I think that I cannot overstate the emphasis and value that is adding value and being able to synthesize research outputs to different kinds of partners. I think this is precisely why people engage in this kind of a grant, is in order to have those expertise be disseminated to different, and in order to be able to, as Drew can attest, in order to be able to speak almost different languages, in order to know how to cover certain topics for municipal audiences, for citizens, and for researchers, and really moving beyond the kind of esoteric scope of research that sometimes doesn't get out when it's not involved in a public-facing organization like Geothink was.
Great. So I think I know Renee already answered Muki's question in text form, but I think I would like to repeat it for the panel to answer as well verbally. And so this is a different topic than what we've just been discussing. Peck in his talk mentioned the interdisciplinarity of Geothink, and I think a number of folks have mentioned that as well. And I'm wondering how you guys saw that interdisciplinarity, how it operated, how did people, from social science to engineering to humanities work together? How did those partnerships evolve, and what were some of the strengths of, having those different folks in the same room, so to speak?
I'm always drawn to interdisciplinarity because it's constantly challenging the assumptions in our research and practice. And I think that the most fruitful results came out of that interdisciplinarity. I mentioned two in the Q&A, and Alex mentioned them as well. John Corbett is a cultural geographer. He works in development around the world. One of our collaborators was April Lindgren at Ryerson's Journalism Center. Without Geothink, they never would have gotten together, and they come out of very different disciplines. But they built a fabulous platform to talk about the impact of the loss of local news sources across Canada. And, it seems like a weird partnership. It's not weird because there is an aspect of mapping that's purely visual. And if you look to, for example, Peter Gabriel's Witness program, there are nonprofits that look at the use of maps and just visual, like videography, for communication. But this was mapping news poverty was both a crowdsourcing effort and just a visualization of what's been happening to radio, newspapers, and other communication media across Canada, which is also important because Canada, being the huge country that it is ever more dependent on local news as compared to the US. So that was one, and another interdisciplinary collaboration was between Teresa Scaza, who's a law scholar at the University of Ottawa, and Pamela Robertson, a planner at Ryerson, who are now looking at data privacy issues in smart cities. I think Muki has something to add there in the chat window.
Yeah, I think he's talking about the link to law with Teresa and her students, I think, that you just mentioned as well, Renee.
Yes. I mean, it's, she wrote a fascinating article on the issue not only of privacy and public transportation data, but the issue of intellectual property. This notion that if you have a device that is collecting data, that you own, you purchase the device as a government, you don't necessarily purchase the data that goes along with it. And she found numerous instances in which the vendors would say, we didn't have any agreement like that, so we own the data, we're going to monetize that. That has obvious impacts on privacy, but also has impacts on the ability to leverage that data, to combine that data with other data that's generated within the city.
I would also add a little bit about my own experience as a student and interacting with co-authoring a paper with fellow Geothink students, running into some of the more practical issues of co-authoring in an interdisciplinary fashion, and trying to agree on the meaning of data, for example, or even more practically, trying to agree on how we should be writing sentences and formulating our citations. These are some of those experiences that you don't get without an interdisciplinary grant. And
who was on that paper, Peck? What disciplines were on that paper?
It was mainly between students with geography/GIS backgrounds and law. So there are very different expectations in terms of how to write and how to structure arguments as well between different disciplines. And what's important for students who may be listening to take away from is that this kind of experience of dealing with another discipline that thinks very differently from you, that writes very differently from you, that has very different ways of proving something, of presenting evidence, is something that you will run into after school anyway. It sets you up for interacting with other sectors, other industries.
Where did you end up publishing? What discipline did you end up publishing
right now. It's in review.
Yeah, also Alex mentioned the Summer Institute. We spent a lot of time trying to ensure that the teams, so Summer Institute, we had a client, and students would spend 2.5 days addressing the needs of that client. We spent a lot of time ensuring that the groups were mixed, that there were, for example, law students, and we had a considerable number of law students on this grant. We're with urban planners and geographers, and it was quite interesting when we had aspects of the client project that were highly technical and aspects that were legal, to start to get people to think like, to empathize with the other discipline.
And another way in those summer institutes that we actually leveraged that interdisciplinarity is we had a summer institute in Toronto, and we hosted it at Ryerson. And April Lindgren, who we've already mentioned on the grant, a Ryerson journalism professor and journalist, she was able to come give a talk. And so she ran a writing little mini course for students in Geothink. So we were able to leverage a professional journalist to teach our students how to write better. And so that I'm sure impacted the quality of writing for the grant afterwards. And so that was just a little kind of sneaky way that we were able to pull in interdisciplinarity to everyone's benefit.
April had the students write an op-ed. So to Sonia's point about both the importance of knowledge mobilization in the grant and the way that knowledge mobilization efforts emerged was when we started this grant, we didn't think about, one of the ways that we could mobilize research was to actually have students write an opinion piece. And that was quite eye-opening to everyone, is like, how do you distill something that'd be quite theoretical even though it's practical, it's still written in kind of an academic speak for a general public, and you get the point across in very, very few words. That's very arresting as well.
So we have, I think, enough time for one or two more questions. And I think you guys are already sort of getting at the question that I had planned to ask. And, you know, certainly from this interdisciplinarity angle, but I think there are other aspects. And what I wanted to ask is, what do you think it meant to be a student in Geothink? So some of you started off as students. Some of our folks in attendance are students or were students and are now playing other roles in the grant. What do you think a student gets out of it besides sort of the interdisciplinary stuff that we've already touched on?
Well, to me, part of what being a student is, especially a graduate student, is being in an apprenticeship to your supervisor and really having skills passed along to you from your supervisor. What you get out of it is really, especially if you are involved in the grant management side, is an understanding of all the cogs and how nothing happens for free, and also nothing happens without somebody being behind that operation from a finance or logistics perspective, operations. Having an appreciation for that and how the wheels turn is really something that that is beneficial for students.
I might also add the summer institutes where, I mean, it's a trip paid for by the grant to go to Waterloo or Montreal or Toronto and meet all the different students within Geothink. So it was a fantastic social experience for a lot of the students. PEC was key in organizing kind of social events during that, which were a lot of fun. And getting to, and then something like this collaboration of this this paper that PEC was mentioned in between geography GIS students and legal students. There was an opportunity to publish with rigorous mentorship from different different voices within the grant, different co-applicants, and a lot of that opportunity to create something that was just very out of the box came from being able to come together and have a long weekend with different students in the grant. And
that would not have happened without actually being able to meet physically in the same room. And then Victoria Fasts. Hi, Victoria. Her point there is a large and diverse group of mentors. So so having a whole bunch of people who are interested in your success, who are able to help you in research as well as job prospects afterwards, and diverse social network. Paraphrasing what Victoria said there.
Yeah. Sorry. I just briefly add that we forget sometimes how much when a student comes into a graduate program, they think it's like, I'm getting this money comes from this amorphous place, I don't need to worry about that, I'm just going to put my head down and work on my research, and the only social network and culture I get is from my department and graduate students in my cohort. This isn't unique to a grant like like Geothink, but it is important to broaden the horizon as early as possible for a student. And also, I think what's important for a shared partnership grant is making your research relevant from the get-go.
Sonia, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, and it was just to an earlier point that Alex mentioned and Victoria echoed again about career trajectories. And I think this is another valuable aspect of our summer institutes and the grant as a whole. We certainly enabled many internships and synergies between partners and students beyond just the academic scope. So, and then, you know, it was this really nice sort of feedback loop where we would then invite students who were interning, for example, at the City of Montreal's Smart City office to come and present at the Summer Institute and actually enable different resource sharing around a particular course that she was taking that another student wanted to take. And so there's a real practical value to the career pathways as well.
Yeah, and I want to highlight that particular Summer Institute where we had a government employee, we had a politician, we had private sector players in the city all talk about smart cities, and we also had people talking about legal regimes. And I hope the students were a little bit flabbergasted about how you could take something that they and perhaps their research thought was very straightforward and complicate it.
Yeah, and I'm really happy you said that, Renee, because I think that this is really the value of interdisciplinarity at its core, is being able to confront our own disciplinary vacuums, if you will, and naivetes, and being exposed and willing to then collaborate. And as Peck mentioned, you know, even something as simple as how does the meaning of a term like data travel across different disciplines, and what sort of ethical, legal, and social meanings do we need to consider when we think of just a purely computational or technological term?
So we're just about at the end of our session today. We just have a couple minutes left. So I don't think I'm going to be able to sneak in my last question. But I instead wanted to, first of all, thank all of our panelists for being here. It's been a really, I think, interesting session. It's provided for a lot of reflection on what has been a very dynamic 5-year partnership grant. And a lot of interesting points have been brought up. I, of course, want to also thank all of our attendees for joining us here today during your lunch hour for some of you, and I guess for a few of you, your dinner hour as well. We're glad to have you take part in these sessions as always, and we're looking forward to having you take part in our future sessions as well. And on that note, we are actually planning 2 more Geothink and Learns for January. The first will likely be on urban intelligence in terms of algorithmic and platform technology. The second will be on the evolution of open data in Canada, and that will be hosted by our co-applicant Peter Johnson. And then just a reminder that, of course, today's session was video recorded. So if you have friends or colleagues who were not able to make it during our time frame today, feel free to point them to our website. It should be up in the next few days on there as well. And before we conclude, I just wanted to turn the session over to our convener, Renee Sieber, for her final thoughts.
I don't have really anything except to say that I'm grateful for all of your involvement. You are what made the SSHRC Partnership Grant work. There are an incredible number of moving parts in a grant like this, and it's hard to keep them all in front of you. And it was because of all of you, including our convener, that made it as successful as it was. So thank you.
So thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day.